Now we all know that fans of horror movies really like to argue about what's scary, but sometimes throughout the year some films slip through the cracks, and these films actually get buried by jump scare, cash grabs and franchise noise, but actually deliver some bone-chilling terror. So today I thought that we'd jump into 20 spine-chilling horror movies that actually deserve more attention than what they really got. Some of them are slow burns, some of them are folklore nightmares, and some of them will give you the creeps to the point where you might not want to close your eyes again. Now, let's stop stuffing around and let's turn on the lights and get stuck into it, and let's check out some creepy movies. Now first up is a remake, but it was made in 2021, and it's the good old movie called Wrong Turn. Now this movie was directed by Mike P. Nelson, a bold reinvention of the early 2000s slasher series. This Wrong Turn ditches the inbred cannibals for something far more disturbing, a hidden Appalachian cult called the Foundation. When a group of hikers trespass into their land, they face brutal justice according to the ancient rules. Charlotte Vega's performance as Jen transforms from terrified survivor to hardened warrior, while Matthew Modine grounds the chaos as her desperate father. With tense set pieces, earthy brutality, and sharp moral edge, this reboot proves that horror doesn't need to be dumb to be savage. And sometimes, the scariest thing in the forest isn't the thing that's hunting you, it's the people that are hiding from the world. Next up we have The Invitation, made in 2015, directed by Karen Kusuma. This is the kind of horror that burrows under your skin and stays there. Will, played by Logan Marshall Green, attends a dinner party at his ex-wife's home. The vibe's off from the start. Old friends, new faces, polite small talk, and a growing sense that something isn't right. Karen Kusuma directs this with surgical precision. Every pause, every glance, every moment feels off balance. And when the tension finally snaps in the last 10 minutes, it's like watching sanity itself unravel. Now this movie definitely proves that sometimes the scariest thing in the room is the polite smile. Coming in at number 18 is Cave Eat, made in 2020. Now this one was directed by Damien McCarthy, a haunting Irish psychological horror that feels like it was dreamt in a fever. A drifter is hired to watch over a mentally fragile woman on a remote island, but he's forced to wear a leather harness that keeps him chained inside the house. McCarthy uses silence and surreal visuals instead of gore, creating an atmosphere so thick that you can feel it. Every creak, every shadow, and every stare feels like a threat. It's minimalist horror done right. Deeply weird, deeply unsettling. To me, this is like if Saw met the Babadook in an abandoned cottage. Now this was a little bit of a weird one. The Autopsy of Jane Doe, made in 2016. Now this one was directed by Andre Overdahl. A father-son coroner team tries to identify a mysterious corpse with no visible cause of death. As they dissect the body, strange and impossible discoveries mount. The soon morgue becomes a trap. Brian Cox and Emil Hirsch anchor this with haunting performances that make you feel the dread. No monsters, no chasers, just two men locked in a room with a secret that shouldn't exist. Now I feel in a movie like this, you don't need jump scares when the body on the table does all the talking. Now coming in at number 16 is The Empty Man, made in 2020. Now this one was directed by David Pryor. Marketed as a cheap urban legend flick, but this one turned out to be a sprawling psychological horror. A missing girl investigation uncovers a cult and an entity that preys on human thought itself. David Pryor blends detective noir, cosmic horror, and psychological decay into a film that asks what happens when belief becomes contagious. It's unsettling, cerebral, and wildly underrated. Now if David Fincher directed a Lovecraft movie, you would get The Empty Man. Now at number 15, we have a movie called Relic that was made in 2020. Directed by Natalie Erica James, 3 generations of women confront the slow decay of both body and mind in Relic. When an elderly mother goes missing, her daughter and granddaughter uncover something dark consuming her home and her sanity. It's part ghost story, part metaphor for dementia. Every scene feels heavy with grief and confusion. By the final act, horror turns heartbreakingly human. Now this is a movie where it can turn your memories into real monsters. Now to me, this was a Korean masterpiece called The Wailing that was made in 2016. Directed by Na Hong Jin, this Korean supernatural masterpiece starts as a murder mystery and spirals into folklore chaos. A policeman tries to protect his family as his villagers succumb to disease, madness, and possession. Blending exorcism, myth, and raw emotion, The The Wailing grips you for nearly 3 hours and never lets go. It's heavy, layered, and spiritually exhausting in the best way. Now imagine Exorcist and Seven had a fever dream and had a baby. That's what this movie is. Here we have at number 13, a movie called Session 9, made in 2001. Now this was directed by Brad Anderson. Shot in a real abandoned asylum, this film doesn't rely on ghosts. It lets your imagination summon them. A cleanup crew starts losing their grip on reality as they uncover haunting recordings from a patient's past. It's a psychological horror at its most unnerving. Slow, echoing, and painfully real. By the end, you're not sure if the evil is supernatural or just the human mind cracking under pressure. Now this movie doesn't scream at you, it whispers at you until you lose your insanity. Now here we have a cracker. We have Lake Mungo that was made in 2008. Now this is directed by Joel Anderson. Now this was presented as a fake documentary. Lake Mungo follows a grieving family investigating strange occurrences after their daughter's drowning. It feels real, like you're watching an actual case unfold. As layers of secret and guilt unravel, you start to question what's haunting this family and what they're hiding from themselves. The final reveal hits hard, not with fear, but with emotional devastation. Now this to me is Paranormal Activity if it grew a soul and a deep sense of dread. Here we have The Blackcoat's Daughter that was made in 2015. Oz Perkins is the director of this one. Set in a snowy Catholic boarding school, 2 girls are left behind during winter break. Something evil has found its way inside and it's whispering to one of them. Perkins crafts horror through emptiness. Long silences, empty hallways, and cold religious imagery. Kieran Shipka delivers a chilling, restrained performance that'll leave you haunted. This movie makes you feel that cold dread you get walking home alone at night, and that's pretty cool for a movie. Coming in at number 10, we have a movie called Goodnight Mummy, and it was made in 2014. Now this was directed by Veronica France and Sabrina Fiala. Twin boys grow convinced that their mother, who has her face covered in bandages, isn't really who she claims to be. As suspicion turns to terror, the film explores paranoia, grief, and the fragility of family bonds. Minimal dialogue, immaculate tension, and an ending that leaves you speechless. This is a modern European horror at its finest. It's not the blood that makes this movie disturbing, it's the doubt. Next we have The Vigil, made in 2019. Now this one was directed by Keith Thomas. A young man agrees to watch over a corpse overnight as part of a Jewish ritual, but something sinister is sharing the room. Steeped in folklore and trauma, The Vigil feels both ancient and personal. Its scares come from faith, guilt, and the weight of cultural history, making it unlike any other supernatural film. This movie makes you feel when faith becomes your prison. Now at number 8, we have a movie called Hush, which was made in 2016. Directed by Mike Flanagan, a deaf writer isolated in the woods must fight for her life when a masked killer appears at her window. Flanagan uses silence as a weapon. Sound becomes strategy and fear becomes deafening. It's sharp, intense, and relentlessly smart. By the end, it's less a slasher, more a battle of wills. And this movie is not about what you can hear, it's about what you can't. Here we have rolling in number 7 is a movie called The Lodge that was made in 2019. Now this one was directed by 2 people we know, Veronica France and Sabrina Fiala. From the directors of Goodnight Mummy, this psychological nightmare traps a woman and her stepkids in a snowbound cabin. Isolation, faith, and mental illness converge until reality itself fractures. It's bleak, suffocating, and beautiful in its despair. The longer it goes, the colder your stomach gets. Now this is The Shining, set with a thermostat for pure despair. Here we have a movie called The House of the Devil, made in 2009. Now this one was directed by T. West. Shot like a lost 1980s VHS tape, this slow burn gem follows a babysitter who takes a job in a creepy old mansion and discovers that she's part of a satanic ritual. Every frame oozes tension and nostalgia. Ty West's patience pays off. By the time hell breaks loose, you're glued to the screen. Now this is why I say you can never take jobs from people that pay you in cash. Now here we have coming in at number 5 is a movie called The Taking of Deborah Logan, made in 2014. Now this was directed by Adam Robitel, a found footage horror disguised as a medical documentary about Alzheimer's. As the patient's symptoms worsen, so does the feeling that something far darker is at work. Jules Larson's performance is terrifying and tragic, blending disease and possession into one unforgettable horror story. Now when the disease fights back, you know you're in a whole world of trouble. Now coming in at number 4 is a movie called Afflicted that was made in 2013, directed by Derek Lee and Cliff Prowse. Two friends travel to Europe logging their adventures, until one of them gets infected with something unnatural. What starts as a wanderlust turns into body horror chaos. Innovative camera work and emotional depth elevate this above typical found footage. It's fast, creative, and surprisingly heartbreaking. If Chronicle and The Fly went backpacking, this is the movie that you would get. Coming in number 3 is a movie called The Platform that was made in 2019. Now this one was directed by Galda Gatsu Eurasia. Set in a vertical prison where food descends floor by floor. The top eats well, the bottom starves. It's horror with teeth, and a razor-sharp metaphor for greed, survival, and class divide. Visually striking and morally horrifying, this one sticks with you long after it ends. You know, sometimes the scariest monsters are just hungry humans. Now coming in at number 2 is a classic, The Prince of Darkness, made 1987. Now this one was directed by John Carpenter. Carpenter's forgotten masterpiece. A surreal mix of science, religion, and cosmic horror. A group of researchers uncover an ancient liquid that might be the physical essence of evil itself. It's weird, slow, philosophical, and decades ahead of its time. Modern horror owes a lot to this one. So Carpenter basically predicted every cosmic horror trend 30 years earlier. Coming in at number 1 is The Alchemist Cookbook that was made in 2016. Now this one was directed by Joel Poitras. A recluse retreats into the woods to reform alchemy and summon demons. Or maybe just to escape himself. Part horror, part mental breakdown. The Alchemist Cookbook blurs the line between reality and delusion. Low budget, experimental, and deeply hypnotic. It's a unique take on isolation and obsession. To me, this one's like Evil Dead on antidepressants with cabin fever. So there you have it, everyone. We have 20 horror films that didn't get the spotlight that they definitely earned. Now, have you seen any of those 20 films? If you have, leave it down in the comments and we'll have a chat about it. And do you have an underrated movie that maybe wasn't in this video that you feel probably deserves more spotlight than what it got? Definitely drop it down in the comments. Might make a part 2 of this video, you never know. And I'd just like to say thank you to all my subs for liking and watching my videos. I love you all. And anyone that's new that's watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe jump over to my page. You might like some of my other videos. And as usual, everyone, stay creepy, and I'll keep you on the next one.